My name's Elaine Armstrong. Oh, the Emancipation, my goodness. We have celebrated it. The Emancipation celebration is part of the celebration where Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. And so this area, which borders the Ohio River, where many blacks entered and stayed, some moved on, but annually since 1863, we have celebrated, observed that freedom. And from what I've been told, we're one of the few places in the United States, or we are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, that still celebrates it annually in September. You know, at one time, days prior to when I was a child, whatever day the 22nd of September fell on, that's when they celebrated the Emancipation. So if it was on a Monday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, the people of the community would all come together and celebrate on that day. It was as big a day as Christmas. They would come in here, from what I understand, on trains, by wagon, any way they could get here. There would be thousands. And they had it in different locations here in the county. Very rural, a lot of trees, like parks back in those times. But many people, from what I've heard, lost their jobs. They were working usually for a farmer or something like that, or housekeeping as a domestic, whatever they did. Many of them would lose their job just simply because they didn't go to work that day because they were going to the Emancipation. And now, you know, the modern, in the last, well, since I've been coming, which is probably at least the last, 60 years, it's been celebrated whatever weekend is closest to, without going past the 22nd is when it's celebrated. And it's grown from a one-day celebration to 2 days, just so we can cover everything. And basically, to me, it amounts to a homecoming. Most people that come here, their elders, their ancestors were from here, and they come back just to see where their elders were from, or they may have gone to school here but moved on to the larger cities, Cincinnati, Columbus, other states. Many have done very well, and but so we still celebrate it with pride. Like I said, it was, you know, Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, but as you say, Ohio was a free state, but it was not a welcoming state, as many states weren't. Ohio became a state in 1803. By 1807, they had what was called black laws. Not in the county, not in a community, not an ordinance, but the legislature, the state legislature. By law, you had the black laws. And in those, when you entered Ohio, you had to register at the courthouse, each person in your family, and $200 per head, including children. So, and if you did not have the $200, which you wouldn't, you're black, you're poor, you're probably escaping slavery, or even if you were free, you still entered with nothing. You're looking for work. Most laws, they would not hire you. Community standards, no, they would not hire you. So then you were considered a vagrant. So then you would be arrested. And, or you had to move on, but basically you'd be arrested. Farmer usually would come along, pay your bond, get you out. Now you're an indentured servant to him to work off your fine, which, since you could not file a lawsuit in the courts, you're mine for as long as I say you are. So it was, you know, still a form of slavery. So that's one reason why. Of course, it's a very rural area, very hilly, very woody, and perfect for setting up very rural communities, because nobody really would come this far back into these. They did not really set up shop, so to speak, or homes right in Gallipolis Central in the beginning. They usually went further out to those communities like Buck Ridge, like Poke Patch in Lawrence County, in Gallia County, Morgan, the Lambert lands, all those places that are very small, very rural. Why would they be way back here? You don't know how many of us there are. And so, probably came a few at a time, maybe even one at a time. Go back and get the others. I would imagine, this is just my own thought, that when they went into the main town or community to buy goods like flour, sugar, lard, egg, well, they probably raised their own eggs and chickens, but those things that you had to go get, that probably, I would assume, many times the family members wondered if you would be coming back, because, they had bounty hunters. It didn't matter whether you were free or officially free, or it's still, an escaped slave. If you're black, I can capture you and resell you. Who cares? I've often wondered if somebody had freedom papers. If I snatch them away from you, if I'm white and tear them up, now how free are you? And so it's just amazing history and how we have survived it as a people. We have a long way to go as a people, as far as it's still something that we're working toward. Total freedom in employment, in treatment, and so forth. That's everywhere. That's universal throughout the United States. But when I was coming up, it was unheard of. That would be in the 1950s and 1960s, that you would have a black queen for, in a contest. You couldn't run for homecoming queen at school. You could probably try, but that would be the joke of the school. Same thing with, would be 4-H or any community gathering, a fair or anything. So the Emancipation was a place where you were celebrated if you ran for queen or king or those things, those honors, and that where you were celebrated as a person. It was as an exciting day as Christmas for black people. You had the national speakers that would come in that encourage you, motivate you. You heard from your elders. It was a big food. Everybody brought baskets of food and shared. You saw people from the cities and you heard from them. Bands would be here, big bands that would come in, and politicians, of course, seeking votes. And it was just one big special day, and of pride for that one day made you feel special. And those students maybe that were honored, I never attended a segregated school, but they had just, I think when I moved here in 1958 or 9, the schools, the grade schools, had just integrated really in probably about 1955, 54 or 55. So I didn't miss it by much. But those students in those schools were taught to excel. The teachers that we had would not settle for you not knowing how to read, write. Basically, I think you had to stay like 3 steps ahead, just because when you get pushed back, you'll still be equal to or still smarter than some of the other students, which were white students. You you were taught to compete. Education was a premium. I came from a family, my dad encouraged and loved education. His mother was a teacher. And if you taught school, he was from Mississippi, if you taught school, you could teach black children if you had an 8th grade education. And then where he was from also, like I said, Mississippi, you could not even go to school unless you were light enough to show a blue vein, which were, I guess, in Louisiana, they were called blue vein rules, paper bag rules, compare your face to a brown paper lunch sack. And so you had that criteria. And it's just amazing.
Where in Mississippi did your dad come
from? Hazelhurst, Mississippi, which is part of Copiah, Copiah County.
Why did he migrate up here?
Marriage. But he was in the Navy in the 40s when President Truman integrated the military. And he would oftentimes talk about that. For example, when the ship would come into port, a great big battleship or whatever would come into port, and all the Navy people, that line up, and you see them with their hands, and they're all lined up along the deck. He said the blacks had to stay below deck. Then you basically, what in slavery days would be called a body servant. For example, if the officer or whoever it may be rang a bell, you went in, that means I'm ready to shave, bring my water, shaver and stuff. When he got done, he would ring it 2 times. He'd go back, pick it up, clean it up. So many ways. Civil War, same way, body servants. And then at best, they would be stewards. Because I remember when my dad told us that he had made chief steward. And I thought, chief, that means general or something, when I was a kid. And that meant you were the chief cook. But still in a serving capacity. And that was in the 40s. Now he had my stepmother, the woman he married, his best friend that he was in the Navy with, he married her sister. And when they were both originally from here, from Gallia County. They were from Ohio and they were from Gallia County. And so when they would drive from California, the naval base, and bring them home, or he would bring her home, my uncle, to visit her parents, they were very fair people, mixed, so to speak. They always went for black, but they could have easily passed. He would sit in the front seat and wear a chauffeur's cap, and she would be in the back. And actually, that was his wife. But just to get through the territory safely. Like I said, they were very, very fair, so they easily could have passed. I think they came from a time period, when I say they, her family. Her father was a minister, well respected. He was very fair. He looked white, period. I think he may have even had blue eyes or gray eyes. And there was probably 7 or 8 of them, but they didn't have any more financially than anybody else. He was a pastor, a minister, but they had that. They were nice looking people, and they were very light. And so you could do things that other people couldn't do. And even in the black community, you were looked at differently, I think, in that time period. Those were the people that excelled, not necessarily themselves, but they had the opportunity to excel just by virtue of their color. And same way with slavery. You know, you had your house blacks and then those that worked the fields. And usually the lighter ones would be in the house and stuff. So it's one of those things that I think has kind of been passed down. No longer than that. I've been coming, well, as a child, I'd probably say I'm 72 right now. So, you know, at least 60 years. As with most communities now, it's integrated, where when we were young, the blacks had their, you know, it was almost bordered off. You know, you had your black community, commonly black cemeteries. I missed, or didn't have to go through these segregated schools, but they had those, and they were close. Your school teacher might also have been your Sunday school teacher, might also have lived 2 doors from your house, so you never did get out from under the authority of, you know, because all the parents knew each other. They expected great things. They did those things. Where now we have been accepted since the Civil Rights Movement, which I'm glad it was. I came through that in the 60s. I was a teenager when Martin Luther King was marching and all that. I was probably about the 9th, 10th grade when all that was going on. With that, there's been good and bad, I think. Not bad, but we can do about anything if we really want to. We can go places, have more. I can live in different neighborhoods. I can escape, or not even escape. I shouldn't even use that word, but I can leave if I so choose my community. I can, to a certain extent, get maybe the job that I want, where in the 60s and 50s, 40s and before, it was all domestic and farm work. There was no office work. There was no leader in this. There was no supervisory. There was no, you're going to get, whether it be minimum wage or a salary position. It was day work, domestics and farm. So we've seen all of that, which has been wonderful. But at the same time, I think that we have become so acclimated into society as a whole that we forget from where we've come, and that we did not get here by ourselves, that we, each one really should teach one and encourage that person. When I was growing up, there was no public assistance. I think it's easy now to, you know, get into that mold of, you know, a medical card and food stamps, and by no means is that dominated by our people, not by any means. But I don't think, I would like to see it where you have to get that education. You have to, so that you, when they pull the rug out from under you and these laws disappear, you have something to fall back on. And it's something valuable, something the slaves fought for. They died for, when it was against the law to teach a black to read. We see now how important it is. And I think we've lost a lot in that. We've become so acclimated that our identity is not necessarily important. Here lately, in the news where they talk about blackface, the minstrels, all of that, and it's amazing to me the number of black people that have no idea what that is, what it was, who did that, when and why. But the stereotype, the connection, it's just amazing to me. And so, you know, these whites that have done it at parties and groups for fun, whether it be Halloween or a college dance or whatever, that are thinking, I didn't mean anything by it, it was just for fun. But at what cost? They don't know. I'm not surprised that they don't know. They didn't need to know. But we do. And so I find it very disappointing and shocking many times that we don't know enough about our history. We've lost so much. The churches that we have, I know Paint Creek in Gallipolis is probably, I think, 18 and maybe 18, long in there, the early 1800s. Those were schools, they were meeting places. You met your spouse there, or boyfriends, girlfriends. They had dinners there. You had mutual aid societies that if somebody's in need of money because they don't have money to bury someone, or the family member's sick, we looked out for each other. Don't do that anymore. We've either moved out of the neighborhood, or even the ones that still remain. That I don't go to church, or I don't go to that one, because I can go anywhere now. And so in many ways we've lost that togetherness, that oneness, that, and I think that part is sad, but it's common. But I do think that the emancipation and the pride that came with that, you know, the association that our church association, it was at one time comprised of about 40 or 50 churches that throughout Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia, different places. They might have been small, some were large, but they still came about and were born out of the anti-slavery movement in 1834. So we are one of the oldest, and I think just because of church and handed that down, and the emancipation every year, that continual pride and encouragement and kind of remained. So we took pride in it, and that people crossed into this state, crossed the river and came here. What was it about here? Well, you know, for some, I guess it would have been very hard, but for others it was just, especially like I said, they were out in those rural areas. It was quiet, it was peaceful. We can start a family. We can, as long as we know our place. And I don't know, I just think that the pride for those that, and a lot of people have left and never came back. People that I grew up with, you know, they've gone on to bigger and better. That was then, this is now. I now live in New York or Cleveland, Cincinnati, or other states, and it just, you know, doesn't concern me. But I don't know, it's just one of those things that's kind of been passed down. So many people, when we go to Columbus or other places, they may not even have been here before, but generally their relatives, or my grandmother or my great-grandmother was from down there in Gallipolis, or Meigs County, or Poke Patch, or I'm trying to think all the little communities along the river, Ironton and Burlington or South Point. All of those were crossing places for slaves, and many settled right in those communities. And so even though people in the city haven't been here before, maybe grandma, and right now, you know, it's ancestry, you know, all of that. So people are kind of looking at, well, I wonder who I am, where I came, you know, more so, I think, today than used to be. But, and there are many people, it's a large population, not a large population of blacks per se. We probably represent less than 3% of the population here in this county that are minorities. But for me, overwhelmingly, I notice that we're more biracial, more and more and more. And I think, you know, that's good, wonderful, I guess, but at the same time, in some ways, I think it's sad. I can't really explain it, but yeah, it's just, but I notice more and more that, and that's what they go by, biracial. You know, where when I was a kid, and in my own thinking, I still think like my parents did. I always said, our blood's like Jesus' blood. One drop makes you whole. And so we were always taught that, you know. And your law books, I have 2 Virginia law books, law code books. One is dated, I think, 1849. The other one's 1860. And they have all these laws in there, well, laws for everything. But they also have sections for slaves, the treatment of them, what they can do, what they can't do, what you can sell them, you couldn't hire them, you know, all of those punishments and what you could do with them. And it's just how they would break it down to 1/64th, you know, so that made you, in other words, a drop made you black. And I've just always come under that, which I think is good because I take pride in that. Don't go over there? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Plenty. And still reluctant. Not that you necessarily couldn't, but historically, we always heard it, or you never knew anybody that was black that lived there. And so you just, you know, please don't let my car break down here. You know, basically they called them sundown towns, and which, from what I've heard, I've never seen any, but I've heard that in some places, you know, they would have little signs up, like you have your rotary sign with, you know, don't let the sun go down on you here, Negroes. And, but yes, there's communities really all around, or even in other counties, but still ones that adjoin us. Crown City, I've never heard of any living in there. And it's hard to explain, you know, really when you're black, or maybe hard for me. But when you go through, you kind of look for those entities or welcoming, maybe it's just a feeling, but if you stop even, vibes, that's the word. It may be that you even just stopped and got gasoline, but you can tell by the looks, you're like, you're not from around here, are you? You know, that, I think it's just that, and I think our antenna goes up. For example, when I travel, I won't stay at just any little hotel. I want to be at a chain, a nationally known chain, that I know they're going to have guidelines and so forth. I'm not going to stay at Bob and Mary's or so-and-so's bed and breakfast. If we're going to go on vacation, I want to know where we're going. Where's that at? What's it near? And I think, maybe it's just me, but I think we do that as a people. I think we do that. Kind of watch, you know, where you're going and how you're going to be, how you think you'll be received. Yeah, Camden Park is still open today. And it's, when we were kids, that was, oh my, if we could get to Camden Park, that was equal to what we would call Kings Island or with Six Flags, you know, when you're a kid that long ago, for me, those were big places. It wasn't nearly a fraction of that size, but still, they, you know, you could be there all day and they just had rides and so forth. But they had one day, it was in Huntington, West Virginia, which is probably 45 to 50 miles from here on the West Virginia side. And they had one day per year, I think it was the first Monday in August, that it was for blacks. It was called Colored Day. And one day per year that it was open to blacks. The other days you could not go. I remember when I was in the 8th grade, and we always used to go to, the school always went to Huntington, to the Heiner's, it was called Heiner's Bakery. You toured the bakery. It was the 8th grade class before you go to high school, your trip, that end of the year trip. And that particular year, some of us said, well, let's go. We didn't know. let's go to, Camden Park. So that's what they settled on. They're going to Camden Park. We get down there, and it takes forever to get in. And what it was going on was blacks were not allowed in there. And we were with a class, and there was probably maybe 7 or 8, 10 at the most out of maybe 50 kids that went, and they didn't want to let us in. And so, but then if we can't go in, the others can't go in, and you're losing all this money, so they eventually let us go in. But 1 day per year. It was called Colored Day. And people would come, it was like Christmas. When it was Colored Day, I can remember, I lived in Ironton at that time. I was probably about in the 5th, 6th grade. And Ironton, Ohio, which is about maybe 20 miles from. And as far as you could see would be cars lined up, cars and vans lined up back to back, like a wagon train. They're going, and they've come from Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio, going to Camden Park.
What was it? Do you remember what it was like there on that 1 day a year?
Too busy playing, running, and riding. But everybody there was black, except for the ones that, ran the rides or whatever. Yeah, it was our day. It was our day. 1 day per year. It just seems amazing. It's not that way now, but I mean, that was standard. Yeah, first Monday of August. I've always wanted to go down to Huntington and look in their newspaper and try to look that up, what the history was. I've tried to look it up on the computer, just segregation, and nothing really. I think there was one article that came up, a black man and a woman that were from that area that talked about it being, but I wanted to see like the ad in the paper that advertised, Monday's Colored Day. Yeah. I never could find anything online, but I said, I know if I go down there to their library, that their papers, their microfilm for their papers.
That'd be really interesting.
Yeah. Now I look at the river differently. I never thought about it. Just, the Ohio River. I mean, up until just recently, all the years I've been down here, and I even had displays. I never really thought about the role that the river, which is probably right at this point, less than 4 miles from where we are, how many blacks were trafficked up and down the river, because West Virginia was a slave state, but how many were trafficked up and down, and then how many escaped and came across over to here. So I don't know, the river just, to me, I see it different than I used to. And now when I think about it, that term, sold down the river, so-and-so sold me down the river. Now I know that's where that came from. Nobody told me, but that's where that comes from. So-and-so, somebody told on you, they sold me down the river. Yeah, and that's what that comes from. Because they, trafficked them up to and from. Maryland was a slave state and stuff. But just like they haul coal, salt, and all of that. But there's a tremendous history here. I did have the opportunity, which I call the cherry on top of my just hobby and collecting. In 2011, I taught a class at the University of Rio Grande on the Underground Railroad along the Ohio. And so it had been in the newspaper. It was for teachers. So, about noise. So it was for teachers. So a lot of teachers came, they put it in the newspaper. Well, one of the people that saw the article in the paper about this class that was coming up on the Underground Railroad, came down to one of our presentations during that week. I think I had it for maybe, it was a month. And they came down. the mayor of Middleport, which is 25 miles or so away. And he came down, and so we had fun all that week. We talked all about the things that I've got, and the Underground Railroad, and blah, blah, blah. So one of the stories in the course book, in the class book, was about this family. Their last name was Polley. Polley, I think is how it's spelled. And there was an article, one whole chapter on, and it fascinated me because they had been slaves in Greenup, Kentucky. And Greenup is down near Ashland, an hour away. And so I had lived in Ironton, Ohio. And so I could relate to that. Talked about different things along the river and Cincinnati and slaves and stuff. But there was something about that chapter just fascinated me because I know where that's at. Well, the story was this family had been slaves in Greenup, Kentucky. And the slave master freed them. Freed this man and his wife, and they had 7 children. They get in a boat and row, and this was in 53. They get in a boat and they row over to the Ohio side, which would be Ironton, Ohio. So since I lived there, I guess that's what the fascination was. And they said somebody that had been owed money by the slave master went to, collect their money. The slave master don't have any money. And he said, well, those slaves that you freed, they were worth money. And so he gets a posse together and goes over to, they had already settled in Ironton, and I think they've been there a year or two, maybe not even that long. And he gets a boat and gets a posse together, goes over, breaks in their house in the middle of the night, steals the children, shoots at the father, just barely misses him, steal all 7 children. And they range in age from like 2 years old up to age 17. And it said every day you could see the mother standing down at the riverbank, just crying, mourning her children, knowing that they're over there somewhere across the river. They're over there. And they said John Campbell, who was an abolitionist and founded Ironton, Ohio, and who else? I think, I've forgotten, it's been so long. William Lloyd Garrison was one, and there was another one though, Samuel P. Chase. They were state legislators as well, but John Campbell was an abolitionist. Well, they got hold of the story, felt sorry for her, hired an attorney, to get the children back, won the case. They go to get the kids. 4 of the 7 have been resold. And so this is we're in a tri-state area. Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, they're all connected. You go across the bridge, you're in West Virginia. You go down to Ironton, cross that bridge, you're in Kentucky or Huntington. And so they tried to get them back from those states. You can't tell us what to do. This is Kentucky. This is West Virginia and stuff. So anyway, they got tied up in the courts, stayed that way. Just would be put on, continued till 1859. I think it said they did get 3 of them back. 1 child had died, and 1 child had had a baby, but they didn't get those other ones back. And so at 1859, it was still on the books, but it just kind of fell off the dock. Nobody followed up until that guy I mentioned to you that came to my class, that we had taught history. He called me. My class was in 2011. He called me the following April, and he said, Elaine, my daughter is a lawyer in Wayne County, West Virginia, which is down near Huntington. And he said, they're getting ready to have a slave case, court case. Matter of fact, I brought that book. I'll show it to you. And they're getting ready to have a slave case with some children and stuff. I said, the Polleys? And he said, I don't know. I just know that the hearing is coming up in about a week. And I just thought, would you like to go? Because me and my wife are going. He taught history in school. And I said, yes, I want to go. So about the next day, he called me. And he said, the judge that's going to hear the case wants to know if you'll meet with him for dinner. There was an ancestor of these Polley children that was wanting to, were they free or were they not? And then 2 judges and me. And we went to Bob Evans in Gallipolis. I couldn't believe it. He was going to be hearing the case. He wanted to know what my version, because I guess the father must have mentioned, Elaine wants to know, is this the Polley children? So when she checked into it, she said, yes. So, isn't that unbelievable? So.
And also not.
Huh?
And also not unbelievable. No.
So, but I mean that it'd been 162 years. And so we went for dinner. He asked me what I thought as far as, well, what was it that kept them? And I said, well, you got 3 different states. States' rights. You don't have to obey your law just because you declared them free in Ohio. And blah, blah, blah. So he said, okay. And I took my book, my course book. He looked at that. Both judges looked at that because it was just a chapter on them. And then the next week, and I got to meet the ancestor. And the next week, they had the hearing down there in the courthouse. And they had the whole jury box was full of just West Virginia Law Review, you name it. TV, cameras, the whole 9 yards. Then you had to read through, the judge had to read through every deposition that was written back then. Every letter, every note, why they should be slaves, why they shouldn't. He had assigned different people in the courtroom to pretend to be this person, that person, and so forth. And so you talk about something. It took probably about 2 hours and a half to hear the whole thing. And then he said, based on such and such and such, they were, and he used all those judicial words, they were free then and they're free now. Banged that gavel on and have been. And he named each one of them, those that were still missing. He named those. They were free then and they are free now. And since 1859, it's been 162 years. So when I got back home, I couldn't believe it. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. And when I got back home, I called the person that wrote the grant for the class and told him, you'll never guess what happened. So I told him what happened. He said, well, do you mind if I call the Ohio Humanities Council, because they're the ones that funded the class, and tell them? So he called them probably within the hour. They called me and said, we can't believe this. Would you let us, can we use your information? Is it all right if we contact the National Endowment for the Arts in D.C.? And I said, well, yeah, but if I had known, I would have, written it a little better, my little transcript, my little text. And they said, no, leave it just like this and stuff. So they contacted them, and probably the next day, they called me. The senior federal officer from the National Endowment for the Arts. So we have never heard of anything like this. We have never. And they wanted to know if it would be all right if they used us they have a monthly magazine. And I said, of course. Then I got on the phone again. Guess now what happened? So, of all the things that I've ever done, and it hadn't been a lot, because this is a hobby for me, but I've learned so much. That was the cherry on top of all. If I never get to do nothing else, to sit in that courtroom, and it had been 162 years, and the day they did it was on a Friday. It was Good Friday. It was Good Friday. Yeah. When he banged that gavel and just said they were free then, but he said other judicial things first. He led into that and said, and then he said they were free then and they're free now. And it had been since 1859, and this was April of 2012. And the ancestor that I'd had dinner with him, he just put his head down on the table and cried. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. But I've got the book. He wrote a book after that, and he's got pictures and everything, but he wrote a book and told all the names and everything. It was amazing. Yeah. Yeah, it was. I'm sorry it took so long to tell that one, but that one that's the story of stories for me. Now, and his name is James Hale. He wrote the book, and he was the one that it was his hobby. He bumped into that, and he'd kind of heard little stories when he was a kid about his ancestors and about the children and stuff. So he just went from courtroom to courtroom, state to state, dug, researched, and then went to the judge in Wayne County, West Virginia, which is near Huntington.